I'm Carol Lawson, an estate planning and probate attorney in Clearwater, Florida. Today we are going to discuss the different types of trusts. I'm going to highlight a few of the major differences between a revocable trust, which is also often referred to as a living trust, and an irrevocable trust. The first big difference is the fact that a revocable trust can be changed or modified or revoked, done away with completely at any time by the person or the people creating the trust. This is really a key difference. If you create a revocable trust, you're typically doing so to avoid probate. That's the main purpose of creating a revocable trust. You want to make sure that the assets that you own do not have to go through the long, expensive court process of probate before they get passed on to your beneficiaries. Thus, you create a revocable trust, but in doing so, you are the one who retains control. You can change what's in the trust at any time. You can change the wording of the trust itself. You can even totally do away with the trust if you decide you don't want to have it any longer. Whereas an irrevocable trust, once it is formed and it's signed, it's fully executed, it's notarized, and you fund the trust by moving assets into the trust. The irrevocable trust, once formed and funded, cannot be changed, altered, or amended, even if the person who created it wants to do so. Once it's signed and you have stuff in it, you're stuck with it. It's going to remain how it is. So that's the big difference, whether you can make changes or not to the trust or move things out of the trust if you wanted to. The next difference is ownership. So who actually owns the property in the trust? With a revocable trust, technically become the title holder of property in the trust. With a revocable trust, the person who's putting the property in the trust, we call it the grantor. The person creating the trust, they're still maintaining control over those assets. The grantor can decide to take the assets out of the trust at any time and put them back in their name, or move things in and out. They are for legal purposes, still pretty much like the owner of the asset. They're going to still be able to maintain full control over that asset, the same as they did before when their names was the only owner of the asset. Whereas with an irrevocable trust, once you transfer that asset into the trust, it is no longer owned or controlled by you. It is owned by the trust itself. It is outside of your ownership interest and your control. You no longer have a say in what's going to happen with that asset. You can't just take it out of the trust at any time and call it your own again or put it into your name. The next difference is protection of the asset. If you're maintaining complete control of an asset like you are in a revocable trust, and you are, in essence, still the owner as in a revocable trust, it is not going to be able to give you asset protection because the assets are still effectively operating as your own. A revocable trust is apart from you. If you transfer things to a revocable trust, you're going to get a lot of protection regarding the avoidance of probate. However, you're not going to have the added benefit of asset protection, whereas an irrevocable trust can offer asset protection. If you're giving up the ownership and giving up control of the asset in exchange for heightened asset protection, this asset no longer belongs to you legally. It is outside of your control. Because of that, and because it's being owned by this trust, that's what makes it so that if somebody comes at you, a creditor, or somebody tries to get a judgment against you, they can't attach or attack the asset that's in the irrevocable trust because it's no longer owned by you. The last difference that I'm going to talk about has to do with estate taxes. Currently, the limit on what you can pass down as an individual is about $13 million. So a lot of us don't have to worry about federal estate taxation. With this $13 million threshold, an irrevocable trust can effectively remove the assets that are over the threshold from their estate to reduce or do away with the taxation completely. A revocable trust cannot do this. Whatever you have in your revocable trust, whatever assets you have transferred into your revocable trust, they will be subject to that limit of $13 million. If you go over that limit with your assets in your revocable trust, there's going to be tax consequences. Whereas if you move assets into an irrevocable trust, it effectively takes those assets outside of your taxable estate and puts them into their own trust, so they're no longer subject to taxation. This is also why a lot of people will use irrevocable trust in order to get their taxable estate down below the threshold so that they either reduce or totally eliminate taxes. I hope this helped to explain some of the differences. So if you inherit property through a revocable trust, you get what's called a step up in basis for calculating taxes. One is capital gains tax. Capital gains tax is the amount of tax that you pay on any profit you realize from the sale of real estate or, the sale of specific property. For an example, you buy a condo for $100, 000.00. 2 years later, you turn around and you sell it for $300,000. Well, you've realized a gain of $200,000. There was a $200,000 profit, and that is the number that you would pay capital gains tax on ordinarily. Let's take that same scenario, and this is where I'm going to also talk about step up in basis in that same scenario. Your parents bought their home at $100,000 and you inherited it and then turned around and sold it for the $300,000, but you inherited the property through a revocable trust. The number that you get to use to calculate your taxes is the date of death value of the home or the value when you inherited it. So when you actually inherited that property from the trust and took it from the trust and put it in your name, it had a certain fair market value at that point. Let's say it was $300,000 on the date of death value, or the fair market value when you inherited it is $300,000. So you get a step up in basis. Basis is what you use to calculate taxes to the $300,000. So you're not standing in your parents' shoes. You don't have to use their $100,000 number that we were using in this example when they pay for it. You get to use the $300,000 to calculate taxes. There is less of a capital gain because you're starting with $300,000 instead of $100,000 now if you choose to keep this property. You're going to take the property at the fair market value that it was when you inherited it. Let's say you choose to sell it 3 years down the road. 3 years down the road, the capital gains tax will be calculated on the appreciated value. You inherit it. The value that gets assigned to you for tax purposes is $300,000. Well, say by the time you sell it, it's gone up again, and now it's $500,000. Well, now you're going to pay the difference between the $300,000 and the $500,000, or you're going to pay capital gains on $200,000 versus needing to use the number that they paid for it, $100,000 and the $500,000. So it really does make a difference with capital gains tax. There's different rules for irrevocable trust when you inherit property. Hope this overview helps.